Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are completely reconstructing how you understand your own neurobiology. We're looking directly at how brain wiring drives performance, and essentially, I'm handing you the literal user manual for your biological hypercar. If you've ever felt paralyzed by your goals or just exhausted by your own ambition, well, that stops today. Let's get right into it.
So get this. There's a startling psychological study where researchers placed people in a completely sterile, windowless room. They took away their phones and told them to just sit alone with their thoughts for 15 minutes. The catch? They left a device on the table that delivered a painful 70-volt electric shock if pressed. Shockingly, 74%, nearly 3/4 of human beings, chose to repeatedly electrocute themselves rather than sit alone with their unmedicated, unstimulated thoughts for just a quarter of an hour. It's wild, right? But it beautifully illustrates how desperate our modern brains are for constant input. We are literally electrocuting our neural pathways daily with low-grade digital stimuli just to avoid our own baseline cognition.
We're definitely skipping the generic hustle culture advice today. Instead, we're going to fix your biological friction by tackling 6 things: the human hardware glitch, bypassing the fear center, defending your dopamine fuel, architecting your neural morning, hardwiring a desired reality, and finally, the biology of recovery.
Okay, part 1, the human hardware glitch. We have to start by diagnosing the core problem here.
Why do you feel paralyzed despite possessing the most advanced biological machinery in the known universe? Well, there's an ultimate conflict happening inside your skull right now. Your massive visionary center, the prefrontal cortex, makes up a staggering 40% of your brain. Think of it as the CEO, but it's constantly being overridden by the amygdala, which is basically a panicked ancient security guard located in your limbic system. When the CEO sets a massive goal, that security guard perceives the metabolic energy required as a literal biological threat to your survival. It sounds the alarm and forcefully drags you back into comfortable procrastination.
Now, what's really fascinating is how the top 1% fix this glitch. In an average brain, the network for visualizing a goal and the network for physical execution operate kind of like a seesaw. They struggle to fire at the same time. You're either daydreaming or you're blindly doing chores. But elite performers have achieved what's called functional coupling. Through intense repetition, they have physically wired these 2 separate networks together. So for them, the mere thought of a goal involuntarily triggers forward motor momentum. The engine is finally connected to the wheels.
Moving to part 2, bypassing the fear center. We need to figure out exactly how to build that bridge.
To force functional coupling, we have to take the microphone away from that panicked security guard. And you do it through distant self-talk. Look, when things get hard, your internal monologue probably says something like, "I am overwhelmed," or "I need to do this." But the amygdala fundamentally owns the word I. By simply changing your internal monologue from I to you, saying to yourself, "You need to execute this now," you immediately create a cognitive buffer. The fMRI data is clear here. This single pronoun shift pushes electrical activity right out of the emotional limbic system and straight into the logical prefrontal cortex. The CEO takes over. You start observing your racing heart not as terror, but as your body mobilizing glucose and oxygen to prepare for peak output.
Which brings us to part 3, defending your dopamine fuel. Honestly, even the most brilliant CEO is going to fail if they're swimming in a chemically toxic environment. Dopamine evolved to make hard things possible. It's the molecule of relentless pursuit, not just pleasure. When you grab that glowing rectangle of doom first thing in the morning to scroll social media, you get a cheap dopamine spike for 0 physical effort. And when that dopamine rapidly crashes, it kicks off a terrifying domino effect. It forcefully drags down serotonin, collapsing your mood into lethargy. That drop halts acetylcholine, totally deleting your capacity for deep focus. Before your feet have even hit the bedroom floor, you have chemically bankrupted your motivation, and your brainwaves just flatline into an idling limbo. Let's fix that with part 4, architecting your neural morning.
To build an impenetrable defensive perimeter around your chemical fuel, elite performers mechanically program their biology the very second they open their eyes. This isn't just a cute list of habits. This is the M.O.V.E.R.S framework, a highly specific sequence of biological triggers. We start with meditation, simply holding the brain in relaxed alpha waves so the prefrontal cortex can actually boot up before the world demands your attention. Next is oxygenation. A 2-minute humming exhale physically stimulates the vagus nerve, dropping your primary stress hormone, cortisol, by an absolutely staggering 60% in just 120 seconds. We follow that with exercise to flood the brain with BDNF, which is literal miracle grow that makes your neural network highly malleable.
Then reading builds complex cognitive reserve. And finally, scribing. You write your toxic anxieties in a red journal to close open cognitive loops. That's known as the Zygarnik effect. And you write specific goals in a green journal to program your reticular activating system. That basically turns on your brain's internal GPS filter for success.
Now, I want to circle back to the V in that framework, visualization, because this flawlessly proves its power. Check out this Harvard study. Group A physically lifted weights with their finger and saw a 30% strength increase. Standard stuff, right? But Group B sat totally still, vividly visualizing the exercise, and also saw a 30% strength increase. No way, right? But it's true. Your brain fundamentally cannot distinguish between intense physical reality and highly sensory imagined reality. When you vividly visualize your daily execution, you are laying down literal electrical tape, called myelin, over those neural circuits. You are physically thickening the wiring. So when you face the real task later, your brain just perceives it as a routine program it has already successfully executed.
All right, on to part 5, hardwiring a desired reality. Because a morning routine is really just the launch pad. You must forcefully architect your deep subconscious so these adaptations actually survive the chaos of a Tuesday afternoon. Enter the reverse G.R.E.A.T framework. You start with the friction of training to prove to your nervous system you're serious. Then, absolute clarity. Your brain's supercomputer is terrible at ambiguity, so give it strict metrics. But step 3, emotion, is where 95% of people fail. A thought alone is a weak electrical signal, but adding intense emotion acts as biological glue. It tells the brain, hey, this is vital for survival. Myelinate this immediately. You lock this all in through repetition. And finally, gratitude. And listen, this isn't some bumper sticker slogan. fMRI scans show that just 5 minutes of focused gratitude daily physically hypertrophies, meaning it thickens the gray matter of your prefrontal cortex by up to 10%, all while sedating your panic center.
But beware, you are not operating in a vacuum here. You also have to ruthlessly curate your environment because of mirror neurons. Your brain is a sponge. It is biologically designed to mimic the emotional states and habits of your tribe for survival. This means your brain will literally rewire its own synaptic connections to match the cortisol levels, the complaints, and the cheap dopamine addictions of your 5 closest contacts. Your mirror neurons will drag your newly upgraded hardware right back down to the lowest common denominator if you don't fiercely protect your inner circle.
And finally, part 6, the biology of recovery.
We've essentially built a $1 million hypercar engine today, but running it at maximum capacity will rip it apart without non-negotiable biological maintenance. Sleep is not a luxury, folks. A lack of it literally unravels your DNA expression. The first 4 hours are dominated by deep delta sleep for physical repair. But when you sacrifice the final hours of this 8-hour timeline for the sake of hustle culture, you entirely skip the vital REM phase. During REM, your glymphatic system activates. The glial cells in your brain physically shrink by up to 60%, allowing cerebrospinal fluid to rush in and literally power wash toxic, Alzheimer's-linked amyloid plaques right out of your skull. If you cut sleep short, you're waking up with a brain coated in toxic sludge.
So what if you're a global operator who geographically just cannot get 8 consecutive hours? For top-tier executives, the ultimate biological workaround is nsdR, or non-sleep deep rest. It's a highly specific, guided somatic relaxation protocol. It artificially drives the brain directly from waking beta waves straight down into pure delta repair, without ever actually crossing into sleep. By implementing just a 35-minute nsdR session, elite performers are generating an absurd 31 minutes of pure delta brainwave repair. It's unmatched leverage to clear cognitive sludge on command.
So there you have it. You're no longer flying blind. You have the manual to the hypercar. Think about every abandoned goal, every limitation, every quote-unquote failure you've ever experienced up until this exact moment in your life. What if absolutely none of it was a character flaw? What if your entire struggle has just been a mechanical software glitch in a machine you now completely command? The code is yours. The real question is, what are you going to build next?